Welcome to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with a candid conversation about our energy needs, our energy security, and your energy future. Texas oil and natural gas have made our nation the world's energy leader, constantly innovating and investing to fuel the economy, protect the environment, and power the world. This industry is fast-paced, high-tech, and essential to improving modern life. And we're here to talk about it. You're listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of TXOGA Talks. We have an exciting program for you today. Obviously, I'm joined by TXOGA Vice President and Government of Regulatory Affairs, Shana Joyce. Good to see you today.
Good morning. Happy to be here today and excited to talk about the election.
Well, it was a big day for America. It was a big day in Texas, and we have a special guest with us today, Tim Stewart. Tim is president of the United States Oil and Gas Association based in Washington, D.C. Tim, I'm glad you're in D.C. and not me, but we're glad to have you via Zoom today.
It is good to be with you guys. It's morning in America for our industry, so I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, a lot happened. I think a lot of people were surprised, some pleasantly, some not so pleasantly. If you look at the map of America, it's a pretty red map. And so I thought this morning a good thing to do would kind of walk through the presidential election first, and then let's take a look at the Senate, take a look at the House. I know some races probably haven't been called, and so I guess you'll have to give us your insight on how this will all play out. So let's just start with that. Shana, anything before we get started?
I don't think so. I know one of my questions are what were the big ticket issues that drove the turnout? I know when I was watching the results coming in with my oldest son, he's 7. It was interesting to see a pie chart of what that was, and I think the economy was one of them, one of the major ones. But what were some other things that you think turned out people, Tim?
You know, that's a great question, and that will be something that we studied for months to come. This political election is not unlike a market correction. Massive ecosystems like this just have a tendency to self-correct. And what we saw particularly, Todd, you mentioned how red the map had become. You saw a significant rightward shift among all of the electorate. Doesn't matter if you're a Hispanic male or a Black female or a white suburban mom or whatever. The whole electorate had a tendency to shift to the right this election, primarily because it seemed like the political landscape had so radically shifted to the left over the last 2 to 4 years. And I think it's just a correction process. It shows honestly that the country is 50-50. And when you're a 50-50 country, it's amazing how big the center actually is. And I think what we saw in this particular situation was a course correction, not unlike a market correction.
Well, in looking at that's a great way to think about it, and we all understand those impacts. Let's talk about the swing states, Tim. There were some pundits saying that Harris could win all swing states. Obviously, Trump looks like he did real well in most of those. Let's talk about those swing states, and were there specific issues in those swing states that seemed to have a big impact in how that turned out?
Yeah, the one underlying thread among everything was primarily the economy. Okay. And for our industry, we are a big part of that. As you guys know, energy inputs and the price that people are paying from energy, either at the beginning or at the end, has a tendency to impact the perception. And so, Todd, in every single swing state, you saw that. It wasn't abortion. And depending on which pollster asked the question and how, democracy was there, but the underlying common thread was what people are paying for the price of groceries and for the price of gasoline. It's the economy, it's the pocketbook issues. And this goes back to Bill Clinton's 92 campaign. It's the economy, stupid.
Mhm.
And that adage has carried through for 30 years. Each swing state's been interesting. Pennsylvania was the big prize. But Wisconsin and North Carolina, which are about as purple states as you're ever going to find, at least for the foreseeable future, the economy was the issue. And so I think different parts of the discussion of the economy, but all 7 swing states obviously felt that. And even though Arizona and Nevada haven't been called yet, I think the post-mortem is going to be, yes, those were pocketbook issues.
Yeah, I read a tweet that said, if someone's paying $20 for something and now they're paying 30, that means something to them. And I think that you're right, it really hit home with Americans, obviously.
Looking at those swing states real quickly, when I look at Wisconsin here, the percentage is, some of these are pretty close, some of them were not as close. But if I'm just looking at the results of each of those states, Wisconsin, you got Trump 49.7, Harris 48.8. You got Michigan, another swing state, Trump 49.7, Harris 48.9. You go to North Carolina, Trump 51. You got Georgia, Trump 50.7. So you had a pretty decent spread in those states in terms of hard vote count. Was it surprising to you, Tim, that Trump won the popular vote as much as he did, considering New York and California and those populations?
Those signals started to show up about 5 days out. And it was really interesting. I'll tell you a little story. I was Saturday night at 8 o'clock Mountain Time. I was sitting in my daughter's high school play, Midsummer Night Dream, which she did a fabulous job. And I started getting these texts. And I looked at it, and there was one particular, it was right after that Seltzer poll came out in Iowa that showed Trump was going to, that Harris was up and was going to, it was like 53-47 or whatever it was. And all these texts are starting to fly. And then somebody sent me another set of data that showed it was the complete opposite of what the polls were showing. It showed that Harris was moving, there's a massive shift in the late days that all the undecideds were breaking towards Harris. And so I'm trying to sit through Midsummer's Night Dream, which is hard enough to understand in and of itself. And I'm trying to not to let my wife see that I'm texting in the middle of all of this. And going back and forth, and I sent these numbers to a good friend of yours of mine, Todd, a guy named John Solomon, who is a really, really good inside baseball guy. And he's a reporter, and he sent it back and said, I don't see this. He goes, in fact, I just got the internals from the Harris campaign. They sent them over to me, and they showed that she was down in all of these states. And it was fascinating, the spread here. It could have gone either way. And I think to the point is, which that when you're in a 50-50 country, when we all technically kind of live in either pink or light blue or purple states, right? The things can change. And I think ultimately the Trump campaign was confident because they saw internals that showed them not only just doing well, but actually winning the popular vote. I think that's a big deal. And again, it goes to this fundamental rightward shift that we've seen all across the country. And interesting that the places you didn't see that rightward shift are places like Wyoming and Utah, where there just isn't enough room to go any further right, same for Utah. But all through the South, all through the Northeast, you saw that. It's been pretty fascinating to watch.
So, what are some of the energy policies that you're expecting in the new presidential administration? We've had a lot of changes under the Biden administration. How do we shift back in terms of the oil and natural gas industry, and then obviously energy as a whole?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time, so thanks. From
So
our
it's a softball
perspective,
for you.
yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll probably whiff it at this point. We all have, from the industry's perspective, we spent the last 4 years every morning waking up wondering what the bad thing is going to happen today from the administration. Without a doubt, the last 4 years has been the most challenging regulatory environment and legislative environment that our industry has lived in through our 160-year history. That's just the matter of the fact. We have never been under assault like we have for the last 4 years. The most immediate thing that will take place, Shana, is I don't have to wake up with that question in my mind. And that in and of itself is quite a liberating thing for us. Trump said in his acceptance or victory speech on Tuesday night, he pointed out the fact that we will unleash American energy on day one. And that is a double-edged sword because it puts a lot of pressure on us to, massively increase production and bring prices down, which just doesn't happen overnight. Drill baby drill is not a panacea. We got to do this smart because we got to keep our industry healthy. You got to find that Goldilocks zone. But I think what you will see and what we're encouraged about is so much of what was done over the last 4 years was done by executive order, and executive orders can be rescinded on day one. And the next step I think that you'll see is that the federal leasing program will have a shot of adrenaline. They'll put the pads on our chest and fire that sucker up, and you're going to see some significant leasing opportunities in the first and second quarter of next year. And you need that. You absolutely need that. You got to have the federal oil and gas portfolio healthy because it balances things out and gives companies opportunity. I think you're going to see, again, a lot of executive orders take a lot of executive action take place. And then further down the road, you're going to put in place what happens in a budget reconciliation bill where you address some things from the IRA. You're going to see a tax bill coming forward. It's going to be a very, very busy 2 years for us. And frankly, the first 30 to 90 days is going to be incredibly busy for us.
Those are some good points. And I had kind of written down some of the things that we might see, and you touched on many of those. One element that I know a lot of people in Texas have been following closely is this insane block of LNG export
Mm.
permits to non-FTA countries. And so hopefully the president can get in and a new Department of Energy take a new stance there and start sending the right message to our allies around the globe and sending the right message to investors here in America who are literally pumping billions of dollars into job creation and tax-paying entities to take this commodity and to make it work for Texas and America. So hopefully that'll be something that's top of priority as well.
100%. And the other interesting thing, not to get into personalities or personnel just yet, but one thing I've truly noticed, and this is why I think the second Trump administration will be different from the first, which is the calls, as of yesterday morning, talking with some friends and colleagues here in DC, the calls are already being made from the administration, from the transition team. Are you available? Can you come back in? And the difference is that, in 2016, there wasn't that infrastructure there because nobody expected him to win. You're going to see an incredibly far more immediate competent team come on board. People who have been following this, who know exactly what needs to be done. And I think you're going to see very effective action almost immediately. And that's encouraging. And so, Todd, to your point, the LNG issue is you're going to fix that. Okay. And that's one thing I'm really encouraged about is I think you're going to see a really, really talented executive team on our issues almost immediately.
That's a great perspective of being able to hit the ground running at a more rapid pace, making certain that infrastructure projects get built, putting the right people in place in all the different agencies to facilitate growth. And I think it's important to point out as well that the oil and gas industry is not looking for an environment where we don't have transparency. We expect accountability in the regulatory process. We just need certainty in these aspects so that investors can make decisions and know what the rules of the game are going to be. Our member companies, safety, protecting the environment, making certain that sustainable operations occur are very important. And in fact, the regulatory environments in which many of our commodities are being exported today requires this level of scrutiny in how you produce your products. I think back to a clip when JD Vance was debating Waltz, and he talked about the climate, and he said, it's about a minute and a half. It's the best job I've ever seen anybody do. He says, look, if you want jobs created anywhere, you want oil and gas produced anywhere, you want it done in America because we do it better than anybody else in the world in terms of protecting our environment, protecting our water, and making certain that employees have a safe environment to work in. This is the type of approach that I think addressing oil and gas, treating it like an asset, not a liability, and to allow consumers to make the choices rather than government mandates in terms of what energy choices can and should be. I hope that's what we see, and that's what my expectations are today.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. That certainty is so crucial. And there's some things that the president can control and some things the president can't, when it comes to sort of production nationwide. He controls what is done on the federal lands and in the federal waters. And what you've seen, I mean, I've got some interesting charts here. The acres offered for lease in 2017 was almost 12 million acres. And in 2023, it was 300,000 acres,
The math works there, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It
the math
shows the
works.
big picture.
Yeah, the new leases issued in 2019 were almost 1,900. In 2023, there's 144.
Wow.
And, and the numbers of acres issued, In 2019, it was 2.2 million, and in 2023, it was 91,000. And so the president can control that. That's the one thing that, the president controls 25% of what the potential oil and gas production in the United States is in onshore and offshore. And certainty is a crucial thing. The operators working on federal lands, I mean, that is almost an exercise in futility at this point. So I agree 100% with that. Certainty is so crucial for our industry.
Those are some amazing statistics, and statistics tell a big story there. Shana, I know you're fixing to take this to a break, but I found a little tidbit I want to put in
Okay.
here. Historical facts. It is a historical moment for our nation, for a president to be elected president, run for reelection, not make it, and then come back. And in fact, if you look back in our nation's history, Martin Van Buren, not a name on the tips of most Americans in terms of presidents. He ran in 1844 and then again in 1848, didn't make it, was not successful in the comeback. Millard Fillmore, 1856. Ulysses S. Grant, 1880. Teddy Roosevelt, obviously, in 1912, ran as a third party when he didn't get the Republican nomination. But Grover Cleveland is the only president to serve non-consecutive terms from 1885 to 1889, and then again from 1893 to 1897. And now Donald J. Trump will take that place as the second person and the first Republican president to serve there.
That's a fun fact. I think there's a lot of historical things happening too. I know there are some things coming up we can talk about when we talk about Congress and U.S. Senate as well. But before we do, we'll take a quick break and we'll come right back.
Thanks to a partnership between TXOGA and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, now more than ever, it's easy for small businesses to provide affordable group health coverage for their employees through the TXOGA healthcare plan. With a TXOGA plan, members can choose the right healthcare plan and benefits for them priced within their budget with the physicians and providers they trust. TXOGA's healthcare plan is available to small businesses with between 2 and 50 total employees who are headquartered in Texas, members of TXOGA, and aligned to the Texas oil and natural gas industry. If your organization is not enrolled but looking for coverage, visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA. I'll say that again. Visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA to learn more. Visit today. Welcome back. We've had a great conversation about the presidency, where that stands, the type of policy changes that Americans should expect. But there's also important congressional changes that have been made. The majority of the Senate has been Democratically controlled. My count is 52 Republicans, 45 Democrats as of today. Do you have different numbers, and what might this mean as we move forward?
Well, we may see again, the one we're watching next most closely is what happens in Pennsylvania, where McCormick is still ahead, and at some point they have to call that race here in the next day or so. Odds are we'll probably pick up one more, and then watch Nevada as well. We may have a senator from Nevada. Arizona is still counting. Carrie Lake is closing that gap. I don't know if she's going to be able to do that, but it'll be interesting. We could have a fairly significant Senate margin, which gives whoever is leading the Senate much greater flexibility. So we're excited about that. I think the Senate's going to see big changes. The House is still be determined, but we've got a lot of potential ahead of us.
So, with Mitch McConnell retiring, a lot of Texans are probably hoping that John Cornyn might be able to step into that majority leader role. Do you see that happening, or how do you see that process kind of playing out?
Yeah, the election is going to happen this next week.
Okay.
It's behind closed doors. It's a secret ballot, and the top two are John Thune from South Dakota and the great American John Cornyn from Texas, and Rick Scott, who's also a great American from Florida. He's thrown his hat in the ring, so they're all vying for the role. I think right now it's probably a horse race between Thune and Cornyn. The Trump dynamic has been a huge wild card because Thune and Cornyn are more traditional. They're not as the Trumpian as maybe Scott is, and I think Thune has a little more rocky relationship with Trump over the last years, and so I think it's going to come down to that. I think Cornyn's done a very good job of trying to thread the needle between the two factions in the Senate. I'm not willing to make a prediction one way or the other. It's just too hard to tell right now.
Yeah.
But regardless, both of those will be the Senate will be in good hands. I think Cornyn, from Texas perspective, obviously is the preferred alternative. He understands our industry and he's been great for us. So.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, we certainly, John Cornyn has been a stalwart leader and served very responsibly in different roles in Texas. So we're pulling for the home team for sure in that regard. Tim, I think having this level of a majority, so we got 52 today. You think we could pick up potentially a couple more? Just depends on
Yeah.
how things go. That kind of says a lot for getting the cabinet members that Trump wants and the people that he wants having that level of majority should make that process go a little smoother. It allows for somebody to flake off there and not follow the team and still get done what the president-elect is looking for. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the last couple Senate cycles, there's been one or two members who are the most powerful people in the United States. For a long time there, Joe Manchin was the most powerful. In between 21 and 23, he and Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. They're the ones who held the republic together, or were trying to destroy it, depending on your perspective. Uh, what happens is when you have a broader majority, you don't have one kingmaker. And so the worst case scenario would have been like a 50 where the vice president plays out, or a 51-49 where you have to make sure that somebody like Susan Collins, who, bless her heart, is a lovely person, is not the one calling all the shots for all policy for the Trump administration. What you have now is, with this Senate majority that's a little bit wider, you keep your centrists in line as much as you can, but you've got flexibility to cut them loose if you need to, and that's where you want to be, I think.
Yeah, that's an important perspective in thinking about getting an agenda done. One more quick thing on the Senate. A lot of media hype surrounded the Ted Cruz reelection. There was a lot of speculation that he was in trouble.
Mhm.
Shana, I think I don't know if you've got the numbers, but it
I
was a
do.
pretty okay. Let's get those numbers on that race.
So Ted Cruz had 53% and Colin Allred had 44. And
So
you
that's big,
it,
right?
it
I
is.
mean, that's
And I was talking to Todd yesterday about how we had really heard Ted Cruz is in trouble. We really need a turnout. He's really in trouble. And he just blew him out of the water.
did national Republicans think that race was going to be that close? I'm just wondering
Yeah.
how that played out on the big screen.
So this goes back to my earlier comment about happening sitting through my daughter's play, right? And she did a fabulous job, by the way. But what happens was the Senate Leadership Fund, which was primarily responsible for right now the Senate, we're operating off of the data that was being provided by this same polling firm, which was doing things differently. It's interesting. Their sample is 120,000 people. It is a rolling sample and it is AI generated. And but the interesting thing was they were getting bad data in, but they were then regurgitating it out. And that's why Cruz and his team thought things were a lot closer than they were, because it was garbage in, garbage out data. Bless their hearts. But what we found is that was a polling miss of significant portions. They showed people like McCormick and Marino way down. It wasn't going to happen. They showed Rick Scott way down, and it wasn't going to happen. And so I think the hype was real, but based on somewhat flawed data. And so they responded accordingly. And Ted Cruz is never always going to have just a coasting reelection. He's a polarizing figure. He's a figure that we need. He's great for our industry. And frankly, to have him slap down his opposition like he did, that's quite comforting.
Yeah, it's a big victory, big statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So should we switch to the House? Let's talk
do that.
about, I think we have some that we don't know yet. We talked a little bit about that earlier. How do you see the power of balance? The balance of power playing out there?
Yeah, this is where it's harder. And the thing that gives us a little bit of comfort is, Todd, you let out with this sort of rightward shift. And so many of these House races have yet to be called. But the thing that gives Republicans comfort is you can't have a rightward shift like that and not to have that be reflected in places like California, where we're still waiting for seats to be counted. The Dems needed 4 seats to take the majority. It's still close either way, but the interesting thing is the Dems needing 4 seats. It's actually the GOP who has picked up 4 seats. GOP has been operating with a 220, 212 majority, which is largely non-functionable. You got to have a little more wiggle room than that, because on any given afternoon, somebody's flight may be delayed, or somebody may have their niece's wedding and things like that. You need a more functioning majority. So I think what we're seeing is right now GOP's picked up 4 seats. This significant rightward shift is going to probably give them just the margin they need. Interesting thing, they lost seats in New York, but they picked up 3 seats in North Carolina, for example. And so I think if I were to bet the farm today, I would probably say the GOP will still hold, given where the numbers are right now. But California still is the outlier. What the outlying impact there? We've got to figure out what's going to happen on the California seats there.
And the magic number, assuming all seats are filled, is 218 to have the majority. And Fox News today, as if we're recording this, has 205 Republicans, 190 Democrats. And so it's a lot easier to get to 218 from 205 than it is 190 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So what does this mean for House leadership? Does it change? Does it shift? What should we expect?
So on the top level, no real change. Speaker Johnson. It'll be interesting to see who is speaker next year. I would bet the farm on Johnson as well, because he and Trump have been so close over the last several weeks. You've seen that, and that's a deliberate action on both sides. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly. Speaking about Trump, it wouldn't. I'd watch to see what the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, does. He may end up as White House chief of staff. And if that happens, let me tell you, vengeance is a dish best served cold to some members. I think you got to watch that. But sorry, Shane, the committee leadership, you're not top leadership on the Republican side, you're not going to see much changes. The committee leadership is where the biggest changes are going to be, probably are in the House side on the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's a race between Brett Guthrie of Kentucky and Bob Latta from Ohio. They're going to decide that next week as well. And on the Democratic side, I don't think things change much, regardless if they're in control or not. We'll be dealing with Hakeem Jeffries, hopefully not, from our industry's perspective. And on Energy and Commerce, it's Frank Pallone. There's no real change or threat there.
Tim, you made a very subtle but very important point when you discussed how Speaker Johnson and now President-elect Trump have been coordinating over the last few weeks. There is a huge difference between campaigning and governing, and it is a difficult process. Every vote affects someone's district in a very real way. But I think what you point out is that they are positioning themselves to really address the fundamental issues that is the reason that the country wanted a significant change. Millions of voters in America wanted a change in the direction our country was going. And it looks like they're getting prepared to deliver that. And that's kind of exciting for me when I think about the border, when I think about tax structure, and I think about the wild types of taxing people for a gain on paper that then really
Yeah.
either materialized, or controlling grocery prices to where we become a third world country and are waiting in line because bad policies in America. Americans were smart about that; they understood that, and I'm encouraged by hearing you say about that level of coordination with them. And look, every political person has their views on different issues that makes them more extreme than others. We know that. But at the end of the day, we've got to take care of the bread and butter blocking and tackling issues that voters voted on. And as you guys started out talking about in the program today, it's the economy, it's inflation, it's what it's done to your pocketbooks, what you've had to pay for products as families that have made it more difficult because of the policies that we've seen. So that's exciting to think that we may be getting there. One quick thing, you said oil and gas is the economy in a big sense. Any of these swing districts, is oil and gas more on the ballot than in others that we're waiting to look at what the outcomes may be?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think all of these members who are new and were elected ran on the economy and ran on energy. You saw that particularly in like Pennsylvania and Ohio, where the Moreno and McCormick both ran on energy and energy independence and energy dominance. And so I think the advantage we have had. I'm going to wax philosophical here for just a second. In the past, you guys, if we've had massive price spikes, it was always blame big oil, right? That's how it was for decades. Big oil is just price gouging. But 4 years ago, when he was sworn in, President Biden took a couple of very high profile executive actions on day one, Keystone XL, canceling lease programs, et cetera, which cemented in the voters' minds that executive action taken by a president on energy linked him to the hip to the price increases. And what that insulated us as an industry, because the voters began to look at it and go, it's not big oil, it's the administration making bad policy. The same thing can happen here with it, with a new administration. If Trump takes some very high profile actions, and the result of that is that there's not a dramatic increase in the gasoline prices, and electricity prices start to come down, he can have that same advantage, mirror image what happened to Biden. And that's good for the members of Congress as well. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on us as an industry to do what we can, again, to find that Goldilocks zone where we're still making money. We don't overproduce, but we're actually producing results for people. That's going to be absolutely crucial for us. And it's going to be an exciting time. And the good thing is we got members on both sides. I think you're going to see an increase in the Democratic Oil and Gas Caucus because they realize they got their butts kicked because they're on the wrong side of energy. So, a reporter asked me earlier this week, so, well, how do you decide who you're going to endorse? And I said, look, from an industry's perspective, we look at the candidate and we ask them, are you trying to put us out of business? And if the answer is yes, our answer is, well, we're not going to vote for you. Energy doesn't have to be a partisan issue. It can be a very bipartisan issue. And I think, honestly, if I were to crystal ball this thing, we're probably going to see a much more bipartisan approach to energy in this next Congress, which is going to be great.
Well, we think energy is good for our country. It's good for consumers. Pro-energy policy that um, where consumers have choices, not mandates, is the approach that our industry thinks puts us in the right position. And we know from history that energy security is American security, and we need to tell our friends and our foes alike that we are going to have a robust energy policy so that we can be a strong nation, and that we want to see those jobs produced domestically, not in foreign countries. And we don't want to be dependent on anyone for our basic things of life. And I think that's a message that should resonate, and that our quality of life is better because of oil and natural gas and what we're doing today. And look, we're not afraid of competition. We know that there are other energy solutions that are being developed, and in fact, many of our companies are developing those solutions. And so we want to make it where it works for affordability, reliability. And look, everything has a cost to it, right? We want to make it as affordable as it can be for consumers. We know that, and we also need to make profits so that we can reinvest in infrastructure and reinvest in jobs. These are the types of things that we're looking forward to the next 4 years. It's been fun having you with us today, Shana. Did you have any burning question before we let Tim go make the world a better place today?
No, thank you. I just really appreciate the insight. I think sometimes here at TXOGA, we look at what we're going to walk into in the coming legislative session here, but it's good to have some insight from a national perspective, especially when it comes to energy, because surprisingly, the pundits don't really talk about energy when they're talking about presidential elections. So I appreciate it.
Well, I got to give you guys a shout out as well. I think the advocacy leadership that comes out of TXOGA is incredible. And honestly, there's a sort of a bifurcation on how the trades work here in DC. And the information and the advocacy that we get out of TXOGA is by and large the best, better than even the DC trades at times. So, and that shows leadership. So I think we're in good hands. You guys are great. Love working with you, and let's go make the world a better place and break some shine at the process we have to. All right. Thanks for having me today, you guys.
Thank you, Tim Stewart from USOGA. You are a great American, and we appreciate your insight. And Shana, any thoughts here? I know drama probably continues throughout the election season somehow.
I'm sure it will. I will say that you can learn more on anything from TXOGA related to natural gas at our website, texoga.org, and be sure to follow us on socials so we can give you the cutting edge information, economics from Dr. Foreman, all of those great things that you rely on.
Well, thank you, Shana Joyce. Thank you, Tim Stewart. And thank you for listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.